You have signed your name to something before. A lease, a permission slip, a group chat agreement nobody actually read. It felt small. It felt safe. Now imagine signing your name to a piece of paper that could get you hanged. That is what 56 men did in the summer of 1776. They knew the penalty. They signed anyway. But the real story of the American Revolution is far stranger than the one you learned in school. It is not a story about tea, or taxes, or a king with bad judgment. It is a story about your brain, and what it does when it decides that the risk of staying quiet has become greater than the risk of speaking up. Right now, somewhere in your life, you are staying quiet about something. A job you should have left. A boundary you should have set. Your brain is doing a quiet calculation every single day, weighing the danger of change against the danger of standing still. In 1775, millions of colonists were running that exact same calculation. For most of them, for years, staying quiet won. So what changed? Historian Gordon Wood spent decades studying why ordinary, cautious people, farmers and printers and shopkeepers, people with families and mortgages and nothing to gain from chaos, chose to become traitors to the most powerful empire on earth. His answer was not about ideology. It was about identity. Somewhere between 1765 and 1776, colonists stopped thinking of themselves as British subjects living far from home. They started thinking of themselves as something new, a people. And once your brain files you under a new identity, it will defend that identity even at the cost of your life. Think about how strange that is. Nothing physically changed. The land was the same. The harbors were the same. The people were the same. What changed was a story they told themselves about who they were. Your brain works the same way today. You do not defend your bank account with your life, but you will defend your identity. Ask a sports fan to insult their own team and watch what happens. Ask someone to mock the country, the family, the belief system they have quietly decided is part of who they are. The reaction is not logical. It is tribal. It is ancient. That tribal wiring did not appear in 1776. It appeared roughly 200,000 years earlier, when survival depended on group loyalty more than individual strength. A human alone on the savannah was a meal. A human inside a group was a predator. Your ancestors who felt fierce, irrational loyalty to their group lived long enough to have children. The ones who did not, did not. You are descended from the loyal ones. That is not a metaphor. That is biology, and it was sitting quietly inside every farmer who eventually picked up a musket. Here is where it gets stranger. Historian T.H. Breen studied something almost nobody talks about: the boycotts. Years before a single shot was fired, colonists stopped buying British tea, British cloth, British everything. On the surface, this looks like economics. Underneath, it was something else entirely. It was a test. Every time a family chose homemade cloth over English fabric, in front of neighbors who were watching, they were publicly declaring which side of the identity line they stood on. Why does that matter? Because public commitment changes behavior in ways private belief never does. Once you have told your neighbors, out loud, which side you are on, backing down is no longer just a change of opinion. It is a public humiliation. Your brain will do almost anything to avoid that humiliation, including things that make no rational sense. Social psychologists have studied this exact mechanism for decades under a different name: commitment and consistency. Once people take a small public stand, they escalate to stay consistent with it, even when the cost of staying consistent keeps rising. A boycott becomes a protest becomes a militia becomes a war. Nobody planned that ladder in advance. Each step just felt like the only consistent next move after the step before it. You do this too, on a much smaller scale, almost every week. You defend a decision you privately suspect was wrong, because reversing it in front of people who watched you make it feels worse than the decision itself. That is not weakness. That is the same identity machinery that turned tea into treason. Now, here is the twist nobody puts in the textbooks. The revolution was never a unanimous national uprising. Historians estimate that only about a third of colonists actively supported independence. Another third stayed loyal to the crown. The rest tried to stay out of it entirely, hoping the whole thing would blow over. A revolution that changed the world was carried not by a majority, but by a committed, visible minority who made staying neutral feel more dangerous than picking a side. That pattern repeats everywhere humans organize. Movements are rarely started by everyone agreeing at once. They are started by a small, loud, identity-driven core, and then quiet momentum does the rest. The crowd does not need to be convinced. It only needs to feel like standing still has become the riskier option. Feel that for a second. Somewhere in your own life, a group you belong to, a workplace, a friend group, a family, is being shaped right now, not by the quiet majority, but by whoever is willing to be the visible minority first. There is one more piece your ancestors carried into that war without knowing it: fear of loss. Behavioral scientists have shown again and again that human beings feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. Losing $1 hurts more than finding $1 feels good. This is not a modern glitch. It is ancient wiring, built for a world where losing your food store could kill you, and finding extra food was just a bonus. By 1775, colonists were not fighting for some new, abstract gain called liberty. In their minds, they were fighting to stop losing something they already believed was theirs: their land, their assemblies, their sense of self-governance. Loss aversion does not need philosophy to work. It only needs a story that something already yours is being taken. That is why the war held. Armies without pay, without shoes, sometimes without enough food, kept fighting through winters that should have ended them. Not because independence felt like a thrilling gain, because surrender felt like an unbearable loss. There is something else hiding in this story, something almost nobody notices until it is pointed out. Fear did not just push people toward rebellion. It also held people back from it for years longer than you would expect. Most colonists, for most of the early 1770s, were not secretly itching for war while pretending to be loyal. They were genuinely torn, the way you get torn when a relationship or a job has gone quietly wrong, but leaving still feels riskier than staying. Familiarity has a gravity of its own. The crown was flawed, but it was known. War was a total unknown, and your brain, wired by millions of years of scarcity, almost always prefers a known bad situation over an unknown one, even when the unknown one might be better. So what finally broke that gravity? It was rarely one single event. It was accumulation, a tax here, a closed harbor there. A pamphlet passed hand to hand, read aloud in a tavern, until a private frustration became a shared, spoken one. Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense sold more copies per capita than almost any publication in American history, not because it introduced a brand new argument, but because it gave people permission to say out loud what they had already been quietly feeling. That is a detail worth sitting with. Ideas rarely spread because they are new. They spread because they finally put language to something people already believed but had not yet dared to say. You have felt this too, probably more recently than you think. A friend says the exact thing you had been thinking privately for months, and suddenly it feels real, sayable, actionable. The idea did not change. Your willingness to act on it did, the moment someone else said it first. Now think about the soldiers themselves, not the philosophers, not the men in powdered wigs debating in candlelit rooms, but the ordinary colonists standing in formation with muskets they barely knew how to load. Historians studying the Continental Army have noted something unusual. These were not hardened professional soldiers facing off against the most disciplined army on the planet. Many were farmers who had never left their county. And yet, again and again, they held their ground in conditions that should have broken them. Frostbite at Valley Forge, months without pay, supply lines that failed constantly. Group psychology offers a partial answer here too. Humans do not endure suffering well in isolation, but they endure remarkable suffering when they believe the people beside them are enduring it for the same reason. Shared sacrifice does something to the brain that individual sacrifice does not. It transforms pain into meaning. A soldier freezing alone in a field is simply suffering. A soldier freezing beside men he has decided are his brothers, fighting for an identity he has already publicly claimed, is participating in something larger than his own discomfort. The cold does not change. The story around the cold does. This is the same mechanism, scaled up, that keeps people showing up to grueling jobs, grueling training, grueling relationships, long after logic alone would have told them to walk away. Shared identity turns endurance into meaning, and meaning is a far stronger fuel than comfort ever was. So picture Thomas Jefferson at his writing desk, or the delegates lined up to sign a document that named them traitors under the only law they had ever known. From a purely rational, self-preserving standpoint, none of this makes sense. Comfortable men risked comfortable lives for an idea, but their brains were not running a rational calculation. They were running an ancient one: identity, public commitment, loss aversion. Every one of those forces still lives inside your skull today, just aimed at smaller, quieter battles. You will probably never sign a document that could get you hanged, but you already know what it feels like to say something out loud that you cannot easily take back. You already know the discomfort of watching your friends decide who they are while you are still deciding. You already know the sting of losing something familiar more than the thrill of gaining something new. The men who built a nation were not braver than you in some mystical sense. They were run by the same ancient software you carry right now. They simply hit a moment where that software, built for tribes and survival, got pointed at kings and continents instead. You have signed your name to something before. Small things, safe things. But somewhere inside you is the same machinery that once put 56 names on a piece of paper worth their lives. You just have not needed it yet.